Good morning, everybody. You know, the great thing about being a recovering politician is that I don't have to participate in any Fed speak whatsoever. I can say things that they come to my mind and not worry about, its ripple effects in the markets. When I was Speaker of the House, we used to say, you have to watch what you say because it can really affect things. So you have to adopt some Fed speak. So notice Chris had to stick to his notes because he has to participate in Fed speak. I could spend this entire time with my points on monetary policy. My early days in Congress, I was on the monetary subcommittee of the Financial Services Committee, and I was the author of all these single mandate bills. So I'm a big believer that the Fed should stick to its knitting, which is keep our prices stable, focus on sound money, and get out of these other businesses, because that should be the goal and role of the central bank. Now, that is not what it is. And right now, you clearly have a Fed that has a juggling act, and they're trying to decide which of these priorities. And so the only thing I would say, and Chris Waller is my favorite Fed FOMC member by far. And it's not just because I'm an adjunct professor at Notre Dame's economics department where he came from. It's because I think his mind is in the right place on these things. But the biggest mistake the Fed could make is if they think that their mandates are in conflict with one another and they switch horses midstream. That would be the biggest mistake that they could make. So Volcker had it right. Yeah, maybe he wouldn't have done it had he known what it was going to take. But once he was on that track, he had to finish the job. And this Fed has to finish this job. And I think Chris understands that. But I don't know about all the other members of the FOMC. So that is why I'm thankful Chris Waller is on the FOMC, because I think he knows once you're focused on price stability, that is the job. And that job is not done until that job is done. And you can't switch horses over to employment because sometimes these things can conflict with one another. Now, if you take a look at all these inflation projections, you had supply siders. I consider myself a second generation supply sider, which means I actually care about deficits. I care about debt. I care about the size of government, but I'm also a pro-growth guy on the supply side. But supply siders like me and demand siders, Keynesian Phillips curve advocates like Larry Summers and Jason Furman, we all sort of we came to the same conclusion, which was we were going to have an inflation problem. And if you looked at the last stimulus bill that the administration passed, because they used reconciliation to do so, they came in knowing we were about to come out of COVID. In my opinion, they saw, let's go get a political victory. Let's spend a bunch of money on the things we want to spend money on. And people like Larry Summers and Jason Furman saying, whoa, you're going to overheat. You're going to goose inflation. And so we're supply siders. And lo and behold, here we are with the biggest inflation problem we've had in over 40 years. So where we part company is, what do we do now? I think what you're going to see is we are asking the Fed to do too much. We are asking the Federal Reserve to do too many jobs. And as I mentioned in the beginning of this, I've been long a single mandate advocate. Focus on our money, focus on price stability, focus on sound money, and fiscal policy should fix the rest. And here is the problem. We have been letting our fiscal policy authorities off the hook for too long. And we're asking the Fed to do too much. Now, I spent my career, my 20 years in Congress and 5 years as a staff guy before that in fiscal policy. Before I was Speaker of the House, I was chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, which oversees all of our federal revenues and 3/5 of our federal spending. And before that, I was chairman of the Budget Committee, writing the budget for the government. And if you take a look at where our fiscal policy is today, there is no clear line of sight as to whether we're going to get our act together, whether we're going to actually have that sort of pro-growth policy that, frankly, I think could mop up inflation, could help get inflation under control without a recession if we have the right fiscal policy. Regrettably, we don't have the right fiscal policy. So what I'm going to try and do is just pace out a short-term view of the world and then a medium and long-term view of the world, and sit down with Scott and just have a quick question. I'm going to make sure that we stick to schedule. Short-term view of the world. Now, the Fed is doing what it's doing, and they have a new tool, which we gave Ben. I remember I negotiated this with Ben Bernanke back in the 2008 crisis, where they can also pay interest on reserves, and they can have people park their money at the Fed instead of out in the real economy. And, kind of with what is it, 10 basis point is the premium, I think. They can mop up some excess liquidity that way. So they have a couple of tools that they can pull these levers on. and they're going to be pulling these levers. And my guess is it's at least 75 basis points. I would argue for higher. But here's the problem. We have fiscal policy going in exactly the wrong direction that it should be going right now. And the administration, and this is when I think if you have the wrong people in charge at the wrong time, bad things happen. Look, you all know my politics. You know how I think about these things. But the last thing you should be doing to this economy right now is be proposing a whole bunch of tax increases on families, a whole bunch of tax increases on businesses. The last thing we should be doing is running around the world proposing a new global minimum tax to make it harder for businesses to compete with one another, to make it harder for countries to compete with one another. So I think the exact wrong policy prescription is higher taxes on businesses, higher taxes on entrepreneurs, no extension of the tax rates that we have right now on businesses. For instance, when we did tax reform, which I consider sort of my best achievement in Congress, when we did tax reform in 2017, we knew we couldn't make everything permanent in the code that we wanted to because we only had so much fiscal space to play with. So we made the stuff permanent that we knew would be politically hard to keep permanent if we had not done that, like the corporate rate going to 21%. But the stuff that we thought we could extend in the future, if the political planets align well enough, the temporary stuff is now coming undone, meaning they're expiring. What is that? Most businesses are not corporations. Most businesses are pass-throughs, LLCs, subchapter S corporations, sole proprietors, and their tax rates are about to go up. And so we lowered their tax rates about commensurate with what we did with C Corps. So that tax rate on individuals, on pass organizations is about to expire and go up. The threat of that happening is bad for the economy. So one of the best things you could do is actually extend those low tax rates. One of the other best things you could do is extend full immediate expensing, which is something we have in law now, but that also expires. It was our political assessment that those things are going to be easier to extend than, say, the lower corporate tax rate, which the administration would love nothing more than to raise it. So you have a bit of a predicament in that fiscal policy right now, we don't know where it's going to go. And that uncertainty is bad for the economy. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, that we get Congress in the next election, but you're going to have a Democrat president and maybe arguably a Republican Congress. I've seen that movie a few times before. And my guess is, like we had with Obama, we'll do something, we called it the fiscal cliff back then. When the Bush tax cuts were expiring, we did not want to have all those tax increases hit the economy. We were in charge of Congress. Obama was the president. We did a deal with Obama, extending most of those tax cuts, not all of them, most of them. And that was good for the economy. My sense is that kind of thing will happen again. But the key tax cuts that have to be extended are those marginal rates. They need to stay where they are, because if those marginal rates rise, and that we call the 20% deduction, then you're raising tax rates on small businesses, on independent businesses. Before tax reform, businesses were taxed at 44.6%. The average tax rate on businesses in the industrialized world was 22%. So could you imagine what you're doing to your economy if you are taxing your businesses at such higher rates than your competitors are taxing their businesses and their economies? And it is a global economy. Even though we're going through a deglobalization run, it is still a global economy where you have to be competitive. So one of the best things we could do from the fiscal policy side to help let the Fed guys off the hook and start getting in the boat and rowing in the right direction with better fiscal policy is to extend those tax rates that we have right now in the books, expensing the marginal income tax rates. Maybe that will be settled and determined in this next election. Maybe if that happens, those kinds of deals can be cut with divided government. And if that happens, then we can give the Fed a little pressure off the need to deal with employment, because fiscal policy authorities will do so. So that is my hope. The last point I'd make on fiscal policy in the short term is regulatory policy. It's really hard to overstate the importance and the significance of regulations on business activity and economic growth. And so we believe we did a lot of good on regulatory policy when we had unified government back in 2017, 2018, in those days. And that resulting growth that came, where wage increases exceeded inflation, where wage growth for the lowest two quintile income earner was faster then their price increases, therefore living standards were increasing. We were knocking it out of the park on all these great economic indicators, and then the pandemic hit. One of the reasons for that is not just the tax reform, but it was also the regulatory certainty and the regulatory relief that came with that. Well, we saw this in the Obama administration. You remember the old phone and pen comment, where the president said, I don't have Congress, I can't pass the bills I want to pass, but I got a phone and I got a pen and I can regulate. That puts a chilling effect on economic activity. That reduces the incentive to take risks. That lowers your horizon on what you think the world is going to look like as a risk taker and an innovator and an entrepreneur. And one of the best things that have just recently happened, and this is per a subjective view, is everybody's thinking about one of the Supreme Court rulings that just occurred. I think the most impactful Supreme Court ruling that just occurred is the West Virginia Supreme Court ruling. I passed twice when I was a speaker, bills through Congress to try and get the regulatory state back under the control of the elected branch of government. Because constitutionally speaking, you want, in a self-governing republic, you want to live under the laws that you write through your elected representatives for yourself. And that has not been happening for a long time. Congress goes out and passes a vague law, and that vague law is then handed over to the executive branch. And the executive branch, populated with unelected, people, smart people, but unelected people, fill in all those details, and they have tons of leeway. And they've been given, because of prior court rulings, Chevron and the rest, they've been given this regulatory leeway to sort of write the rules as they see fit, which then means we are experiencing rules and regulations, laws, payments and penalties, laws that are written by unelected bureaucrats. And if you have an administration that is really aggressive on regulations, that sees that it can do a lot beyond Congress's intent, I would say the SEC probably has that view these days, then you're going to put a chilling effect on the economy. And this court ruling, finally, it's legislation we've always tried to pass, but we could through the House, but never could get it through the filibuster in the Senate. The Supreme Court finally put this back under control. The Supreme Court finally said, no. Regulators had to stick to the script. They had to stick within the confines of the regulations that are within what Congress intended in the laws that it wrote. Now, it means Congress has got to do a better job writing laws. It means Congress, and we put a lot of work into this, has to write very clear and specific, understandable laws so that the regulations that follow stick to that script. This ruling by the Supreme Court, I think, is going to do a lot of good to give us some regulatory to give us some regulatory predictability, to give us a bit of regulatory relief. So I do see the chance in the short run of having good fiscal policy that can help take pressure off of our monetary authorities, so we can try and get some pro-growth policies in place, which really should come from fiscal policy. Now, here's what I want to talk about for the medium term. You think we're a polarized country today? You think that we probably have pretty polarizing elections, that our parties, and I always say in the Republican Party, we have the entertainment wing of our party. Democrats, they also have an entertainment wing of their party. And our entertainers who are out there with their phones getting hits and clicks, who are trying to say sensational things, preserve their own personal brand, get on cable, get on all the other digital platforms, they make it harder for us to come together as a country. They make it harder for us to actually have political consensus. And so here's the rub of all of this. If you take a look at the big fiscal policy challenges that America has as the leading free society in the globe, it really comes down to the fact that our monetary policy is on a collision course with our fiscal policy, or to better put it, our fiscal policy is on a collision course with our monetary policy. Because we borrow a lot of money to pay for the things that we're doing, that our government has passed. If you take a look at the social contract, as it will, our social contract, I think, this is my own opinion, is something that we have all as a country, left, right, and everyone else, has more or less agreed we should have. We have more or less achieved a consensus in the 20th century that this social contract, as we sort of envision it, is good and needs to stay. And then we're going to have a debate about how to execute this, how it should be done in the details. And what do I mean when I say the social contract? Retirement security, health security, a social safety net. I'm just going to simplify it to that. And if you take a look at the social contract as designed in the 20th century, It is a pay-as-you-go system. Current workers pay current taxes to pay for the benefits for current retirees. My mother is right here. I am paying my FICA taxes, my payroll taxes, my taxes, so that the benefits that she relies on, Social Security and Medicare, are there for her in her retirement. And that's the social contract of the big social contract. Here's the problem. In a pay-as-you-go system, as we have today, it is dependent upon, ratios of workers to employers. When we wrote Social Security, the ratio of workers paying payroll taxes to one retiree was 35-1. When we wrote Medicare, the ratio of workers paying their FICA taxes for Medicare beneficiaries was 16-1. Well, it's about to be 2-1 with the boomers going full in retirement. And these benefits, these costs of these programs, they grow at a lot faster pace than economic growth. They grow, well, not faster than inflation these days, but normally they do. They grow 6 to 8% a year. So if you compound this problem out, and with the boomers retiring, we're going, to put it another way, we're going from 40 million retirees to 80 million retirees, 77 specifically retirees within one generation. And the benefits they consume, that they paid their way through their working lives, grow 6 to 8%. There you compound your problem. So that's the big part of the social contract, health and retirement security. The social safety net is the other really important big part. We believe we should have a safety net so that when people fall down in life, you have assistance there to help them get back up on their feet. And there's the big debate between the left and the right. And this is one of the things I do at my foundation and work on at Notre Dame through evidence-based policymaking. We believe that there is good economic data and good economic evidence to show the best way to construct a safety net if your goal is independence and self-sufficiency. If your goal is to have a safety net that helps everyone live the best version of their life, to work and achieve and scale and climb that income ladder so that the idea of upward mobility, which is really the American promise, is revived and believed to be in front of everyone in society. That's been shaky lately. But if your goal is to have a sort of welfare state where you're basically signaling to people from government, you're stuck in your current station of life, this is what it's going to be, and here's some assistance to help sort of numb the pain and keep you where you are. That's a big debate we're having, the effects of which. Now, I would argue, and this is a big project we're working on at the American Enterprise Institute, where I have a fellowship and spend a lot of my time, I would argue that you can refashion a social safety net, especially with digital technology today, where you truly can have a common sense system that works and is individualized and customized to make sure that everybody has opportunities in front of them, that makes sure that you have a social safety net focused on work and family and upward mobility. And that for those who are truly indigent, those who are truly handicapped, there is a permanent safety net there to make sure no one really falls and slips through the cracks. These things are achievable in the 21st century. And back to the main part of the social safety. So I basically said the social contract, health and retirement security. Think Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, the Affordable Care Act, and the social safety net. Think of all the EITC and the child tax credit, all the rest of the TANF and all the rest of these programs. Those things constitute what we call entitlement spending, mandatory spending, automatic programs that if you automatically qualify are automatically spent on those benefits. That is sort of autopilot government. And that is the part of the spending of government that is bringing us to a debt crisis. And when this debt crisis hits, or if this moment occurs, going back to my point about polarization, what do you think it's going to look like then? So this brings me back to our monetary policy. We're already at 100% of GDP with our debt. We've already blown through a bunch of fiscal cushion when it was fighting the 08 crisis, whether it was fighting the pandemic. We've done a lot of QE. We've grown the balance sheet to $8-something trillion. And so the question raises, do we have more cushion if we have other shocks to our system? Is our debt level at such a level, 100% of GDP, and never really coming down? Because if you look at the latest CBO report, it subsides for a little while and then it goes right back up because we have all the baby boomers retiring and we haven't saved for this. We are not prepared for this. Medicare trust fund goes bankrupt in 2028. Social Security trust fund goes bankrupt in 2035. if and when those are just two good dates to put in your mind. When that happens, those benefits get cut automatically across the board in real time for my mom, for current seniors, rupturing this social contract. That is the way the law works. So if we do nothing to shore up these entitlement programs, if we do nothing to shore up these programs to make sure that they can still meet their promises, so that one generation takes care of the next, so that you have a safety net of health and retirement security, when these programs sort of crash with insolvency, the law requires just automatic benefit cuts across the board. Imagine your Social Security check, if that's primarily what you live on as a senior citizen, getting cut by a fourth immediately in 2035. Imagine Medicare Part A trust fund, which it's already more than half borrowed money, having to cut your hospital insurance fund and not being able to pay for the healthcare you need in old age. These are the challenges that we have in front of us as fiscal policy. So the question is, can something be done about this? The answer is absolutely yes. Are there policies that can be put into place right now, sort of stitch in time saves nine, to avoid this problem, to preserve these programs, to make good on these promises of health and retirement security, and still have a viable contract, still make good on these benefits, but don't bankrupt the country? The answer is absolutely yes. I would argue, and we're doing a big book on this at AEI that comes out this fall, is through innovative reforms in Medicare, we call it premium support, through smart reforms on Social Security, let's just say means testing and some different indexing, you can pass policies that will make sure that seniors have a viable Medicare program, to make sure that the poor and the sick are helped more, that make sure that you have a viable social insurance safety net like Social Security. And by having a social safety net reworked to fit 21st century technology and put people in the workforce, you can do all these types of reforms. It, I would argue, takes a bit of an ideological concession from both sides. On the right, these things are important. They have to exist. This is an important federal responsibility. On the left, the private sector has to be in the game here. This can't be government run. This has to be private sector choice, and competition and innovation helps us get these price increases down to deliver goods by using the private sector entrepreneur and innovator out there to help make good on these missions. If we can get that kind of a political consensus, then you can pass these policies and you can dodge that debt bullet. You can get our debt to GDP ratio down over time. You can make sure that our bonds are going to be met. Because at the end of the day, if we do have a fiscal crisis because our debt to GDP gets so high, we start losing confidence in our own currency, but more importantly, the world starts losing confidence in our own currency. And that's the last point I would make, which is, ever since Bretton Woods, we have had what we describe this exorbitant privilege. We are the world's reserve currency. This gives us so many important benefits as a country. It gives us power projection across the world on behalf of freedom and liberty that you really can't quantify. But here at home, in financing this social contract, we can do it on the cheap. But if the world concludes that we aren't putting the right policies in place to get these things under control, to change the way these programs work so that they don't go bankrupt, so that we can still meet the mission of these programs, but do it in a better way using 21st century technology and using markets and using choice and competition, which, yes, requires an ideological concession from the left. If we don't do that, then the logical conclusion is that the Americans, back to this dual mandate these guys have, the Americans are just going to print more money to pay off these bonds. I mean, we have some experience at the Federal Reserve of printing money to buy treasury securities. I mean, I never thought you guys would ever buy commercial paper, but the times changed. So it's conceivable that our central bank, if nothing else happens, will simply print more money to cash flow the bonds, to pay for the social safety net, to avoid these collapses. And if that is happening in a credible way, then the world's going to be searching for something other than the US dollar. And if that happens, the ability to finance this contract is basically unaffordable. And so if you think we're polarized today, think of the politics in you name the decade, sometime this century. Think of the politics when we can no longer cash flow your mom's Social Security benefit or your dad's Medicare benefit or the social safety net for the poor when times are going bad. So that's the challenge of politics. So the last point I want to make, because I'm watching this time, is can we get our politics right? Can we get to a point where our politics can line up well enough that the policies that we know can work and succeed, that's my strong opinion, can meet the moment, and America can lead again the world. And this, the very last point I'll make is we are being tested as democracies. The big test, and there's lots of them in the 21st century, the big test from our standpoint is between, these totalitarian techno tyrannies like China and democracy, a republic like ours. And the question is, and this is, Xi talks about this fairly often, can democracies truly self-govern? Can democracies govern themselves in a way that they can make the responsible, hard decisions to keep it going and to keep people free and to have the consensus in society to get ahead of these problems? Or do the central planners, who are nimble and efficient in their own minds, do they have the edge? I don't think they do. I actually am one of these glass half full type people. I really do believe, and this Churchill probably said it best, the Americans can be counted upon to do the right thing, but only after they've exhausted all the other possibilities. So I do believe that our political system, it has been tested and tested lately for sure, but it has hold. Our political institutions are durable. And so I do believe that our political institutions, which has to be the elected political institutions, can get there to actually pass fiscal consolidation, fiscal policies that can make sure that this social contract is financeable, that they make sure that this social contract is reformed in a way that we can afford it, so that the central bankers don't have to go to the printing press and therefore destroy confidence in our reserve currency. If and when we do this, we're going to have one hell of a great century. We're going to show the tyrannies that democracy still has its juice, and innovation and risk-taking and entrepreneurship that comes with freedom and free enterprise. I will bet on that every day of the week over central planners, no matter how much money and technology throw at a problem. The greatest engine, the greatest resource is the human mind. And a human mind freed to solve problems, to innovate, is one thing that democracy will always have over tyranny. And so at the end of the day, I'm one of these people who really does believe we can get the policy right. We don't have the politics there yet, but when push comes to shove at the end of the day, we'll fix that. And when we do that, then these guys can go focus on, in my opinion, they should solely focus on, which is keeping our money sound and letting the fiscal policy authorities worry about the rest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. As always, it's always educational and entertaining to hear from Paul Ryan. I want to acknowledge Mrs. Betty Ryan, mother of the wonderful Ryan family, and matriarch of the Rocky Mountain Economic Summit here. So we love you, Betty, and it's so great to see you again. I would like to take just 2 minutes, and I know Paul's watching his watch. When I was in college, BYU in Idaho, I had a economics professor. His name was Kent Vernon. He was always late. He came in with a tan off the golf course with windblown hair and donuts to offset his tardiness. He came in and he looked at the list in the class, and in this economics class, and he says, "Scott Keller, who are you?" And I was sitting in the corner on the front row, and he says, "Stand up and tell the class what you know and understand in your preparation about the marginal propensity to consume." I was clueless and did a pretty shitty job. And I stood up, but I want to assure Paul that I won't try to stump him with these hard BYU questions. He may not have picked up on it, Notre Dame, with the questions that I have here. Last summit, Paul McCauley followed Paul in his comments last year as he left and flew to another speaking engagement. I think you flew into Bozeman or to the Yellowstone Club, and he left, but Paul didn't hear the comments from Paul McCauley that followed him later. And Paul is one of our favorite speakers, and you'll hear from him later today. But he says, you know, having listened to Paul Ryan, he says, people are trying to figure out what the right's all about these days. And listening to Paul Ryan, I want you to know, make no mistake, I'm a flaming lib. Now, I can't do that accent quite the same as Paul, but he says, I am a flaming lib. But having listened to Paul Ryan, I think I've moved a little bit to the right. And I think but isn't that the greatest comment? Because all of us here, considering others' opinions, I concluded the summit last year by saying, having listened to Paul McCauley, I think I've moved a little bit to the left. And I think that that's what it's all about, the communication coming together, whether it be here, the country, or anywhere else. So I thought that was worth mentioning. So I have here a list of questions, the aggregate of those of you in the audience. I'd first like to start out back by asking Paul, can our politics really ever change enough to achieve these goals? Or can Congress ever really reform entitlements, and how?
Okay, here we go. I think the answer is yes, but that has not been yes for my adult life. When I was budget chair and then speaker, we passed budgets out of the House each session in our 8-year majority. We lost the majority in 06, got it back in 2010, then lost it in 2018. So in that 8-year period, we passed budgets out of the House that basically did what I described. You can't use reconciliation for Social Security, so that's put to the side. But we passed what we call premium support for Medicare, per capita block grants for Medicaid, and a lot of other entitlement reform changes. And we showed using CBO that we can get the debt and deficit under control and pay off the debt ultimately over a long period of time. So we have proven to be able to take the votes. You know, we raised the age limit of Medicare. We means tested these programs. We grabbed lots of third rails. And everybody used to say, if you touch these programs, it's the third rail of politics, you die. The secret to our success was prospective changes. So we made big structural changes to our entitlement programs in a prospective way, so that we said those in and near retirement will see no change in their benefits. Well, those of us who are X-gen on down, they're going to have to change so that we can actually afford them and cash flow them. And we're going to have to do them a little bit differently, using private sector choice and innovation and competition to get better results out of these policies. We passed those bills in the House for 8 years running. So I would say that we have shown that you can vote for these reforms, means testing, raising the age limit, and survive politically. The challenge is we've never been able to get these things out of the Senate. And what happens is you typically don't have unified government. You don't have a Republican House, a Republican president, or Republican, Senate. You always have something divided. And I think that's fair to say that that's probably going to be the case, or narrow majorities. I think at the end of the day, and I'll give you a quick answer here, is commissions properly designed work. Now, as a guy in Congress, I hated commissions. Why? Because it means you're punting. It means the people elected to do the job aren't doing the job, and because they can't do the job, they're asking someone else to do their job. Well, I think that's kind of where we are right now in Congress. Actually, my friend, your friend, Mitt Romney, is the leading author of a bill to create entitlement commissions. I was on Bull Simpson. Bull Simpson was doomed to fail to begin with because it had no support from the president, had no support from the speaker at the time. Nancy was a speaker then, and it was never going to work. The one commission that worked was the Greenspan Commission on Social Security in the 1980s. Why did that commission work? Because they were given a very specific goal, make Social Security solvent, and the product, the proposal that they would produce had to be voted on by Congress, could not be filibustered by the Senate, was fast tracked to the floor. Both the House and the Senate couldn't be amended, and bam. So you couldn't duck the vote. And that's always the secret in Congress. If something's controversial and tough and there are people who don't want to do it, you can just basically not vote on it. That's the dirty little secret on things in Congress. But if you have a commission that is fast tracked, avoids all the shenanigans that get played with filibusters and this and that, and can put an entitlement reform proposal on the desk of the president by having a one up and down vote in the House and a one up and down vote in the Senate, those kinds of commissions, I think, can work. And I do believe with the pressure that's coming, the looming insolvency of Medicare, the looming insolvency of Social Security, the debt being north of 100% of GDP, our reserve currency being placed into question, those circumstances, those political pressures, I believe, with the properly formed commission, can probably produce a result where people may think they're ending their careers voting for something, but it's so profound and important and healthy to the economy and to the country that I think you can probably get enough men and women to jump over the transom and vote for these things. You got to have a president. You got to have a president willing to lead on this. And that is, just frankly, something we haven't had in a long time. Bush was really the last one who really wanted to lead on this stuff. But I think it's possible.
Wonderful. That's a good answer. I'll explain all this to you a little later tonight, Karen. Next question. What does the role of digital currencies and crypto to play in all of this?
So I guess I'll jump off where Chris left off there. I think Web3 is fascinating. I think it's really interesting. It's going to be an enormous innovator for the economy. And it's beyond crypto. Chris mentioned crypto is, baseball cards. I love the fact that you have, Hayek talked about private money back in the 60s. I love the fact that the fiat guys have some competition coming, no offense. I think that's wonderful. But I think the interesting part of the role of digital and crypto is really in getting rid of all the friction and money between ourselves and the payment rails that come with this. So it may not be crypto itself as much as it's digital. And I know the Fed's got a big digital currency project that they're looking into, and they're working with MIT and others and getting input. The thing that I think matters, and I think I see your next question here, if I'm looking at your notes, that matters is, digital is not going away. Crypto is not going away. Web3 is not going away. And Web3 is the third iteration of the internet. Right now we're in Web 2, which is hyperscales like Facebook and Google and Amazon sort of dominating the space. Web 3, and we go to them and then back to us. Web 3 is we go to each other and we disintermediate. There's no middleman in the middle of this. Web 3, with respect to money, can take a lot of middlemen out, can take a lot of friction out. Let's say you want to send money to a relative in Ireland, and you got to go through all these channels and all these different kinds of banks, and it's going to probably clip 4 to 6% off of the value of your money. And that friction can be removed with Web 3, with payment rails. And replicate that through the economy. That's pretty profound. So I think there's definitely a there. And the question for us as a country is, do we want this new internet of money? Do we want these new kinds of payment rails? Do we want them to be in America, or do we want them to be over other countries? That's the question for us. That's the question Gary Gensler really should be pondering, in my opinion, which is, do we want this innovation? And it goes beyond crypto and into all these other DeFi applications, as Chris mentioned. Do we want this innovation, this next generation internet, like earlier generations internet, to be American? Well, we have to have predictable regulations to pave the way for that. And we really don't have that right now. And that to me is an important thing. But if and when we do that, if we do get, I'm going to bet we're going to get the majority. I'm going to bet Patrick McHenry, one of the smartest guys left in Congress, the chairman of the Financial Services Committee, is going to be holding the pen, writing the law that's going to create the regulatory space for digital currencies, for digital products, for crypto. And if that happens, and if Biden's smart enough to sign that bill that McHenry writes, I wish Toomey was staying. It would be Tim Scott, actually, will be his replacement. If that bill is signed, then I think the internet of money will stay in America. And you're asking me something about China. This is a big deal. And so the question is, and China bumbled this, but they tried to roll out their own version of their digital currency, the digital RMB, as ECNY is what we call it. in the Olympics. They fairly failed spectacularly at doing this. But if you want to take a look at this debate, this challenge between, you mind if I just go to your next question? You got to see
Sure,
someone
go
about
ahead.
China there.
Yeah.
How does our competition with China affect these economic challenges?
Can you say that a little faster?
How do you, sorry, I'm from Wisconsin. It's cold outside. We speak fast so we can get back
Okay,
indoors.
okay.
The question is, China is trying for their own totalitarian reasons, with their own population, put people on their own payment rails, even though they have WeChat and Alibaba Pay and all of this other stuff. They're trying to get their people on their payment rails. And then they're going to roll this thing out to the Belt Road countries and the rest. And they want to give the world frictionless money, but it's going to be China payment rails. What that means is China can surveil your money. China can actually see, affect, change, inhibit money and how money works. So this really is an enormous challenge for freedom. So I don't think America has but a choice. We have to eventually, we won't be first movers, clearly. We have to be the leaders in this space. I think the Fed ultimately has to have at least well-governed stable coins anchored to the dollar, if not a wholesale, not a retail, a wholesale Fed dollar with retail competition all over the place, so that at the very least, the free world has frictionless digital money that where your privacy is protected, where no government can surveil your money and mess with your liberties and your freedoms. So we sort of owe it to our principles that America leads in Web3, that America leads in digital currencies, that America leads on these payment rails, if only for the sake to prevent the Chinese from ever taking these payment rails over. And because we're the world's reserve currency for now and in the for predictable future, because frankly, we're the healthiest looking horse in the glue factory, I would say, in all of these fiscal spaces, we will be able to dictate the terms of this if we get the government policy and regulation right. So one more thing about digital, because I'm watching this, I want to stick to I got 3 minutes left, is there's so much you can do to help average Americans, especially low-income Americans, with digitization. We can take bloated 20th century bureaucracies, handing out all these various different government benefits with massive fraud rates. The fraud rate at EITC is like 24%, tens of billions of dollars. Have you seen the numbers on the stimulus payments? Have you seen the numbers on the extended UI benefits that for pandemic, how much fraud occurred? You can virtually get rid of that when you digitize the social safety net, when you digitize government payment programs and payment rails. You can dramatically streamline government, dramatically get rid of waste with digital payments, and doing it in a proper way with the right civil liberty protections. The Fed does wholesale, the private sector does retail. You know, you're going to have a two-tiered system no matter how you slice this. That is the hill people like me would die on. You can dramatically improve the social safety net so that you have programmable dollars, so that your food stamp money can only be used for food, so that your rental supplement income money can only be used for rent, so that your money tied to work is tied to work. And so you can actually digitize the social safety net in such a profound way that really can wire people to get up and on with their lives. And you can do it in a really efficient way. And if we do this properly, we can demonstrate that free societies can lead the digital world. Free societies can lead Web3. Free societies can lead in the creation of the Internet of Money, so that our values are protected, so that our freedom and our liberty and our privacy is protected, and we can project public policy in far smarter ways than ever before. And because of digitization, because of good policy proposals, I really believe we can meet these problems. Sorry, my phone's ringing here. We can meet the needs of the 21st century. We can keep the social safety net. We can honor the social contract. We can guarantee upward mobility, and not guarantee upward mobility. We can guarantee equality of opportunity, not equality of outcome, and health and retirement security with digitization, with smart economic growth, if we get our politics right. So in the short term, regulators got to get it right and don't overregulate and create space. In the medium and long term, elected policymakers got to be able to get this done. And if and when we do, I really think, and I would bet on this, that we'll get it right. We'll have another great century and the dollar will maintain itself as a reserve currency.
Thank you very much, Paul. That was excellent. I attended a lecture at UVU 3-4 months ago when Dr. Laffer, the Laffer curves at
Arc.
when you are correct. And I was pleased to hear him say, I've never felt any more optimistic about the next 2 years. Now, you economists may differ from that, but that's what Dr. Laffer said. And so I take from that optimism is a wonderful thing. We don't appreciate things that we don't understand. And thank you, Paul, for helping us with that better understanding. Thank you very
You bet.
much.
Pleasure. Thank you.